The window doesn't just close, it locks. And nobody tells you when that happens until after it already did. Right now in Washington, the people with the most Senate access, fund managers, PAC directors, former White House officials, are using one word publicly that they almost never use: urgency. And they are not saying it to get you emotional. They are saying it because the Clarity Act has a real deadline, and most people in this space have no idea how tight the calendar actually is. Here's the thing that gets me. While retail investors are refreshing price charts trying to decide what to do, institutions are not waiting. They are buying XRP right now at a higher rate than they are buying Bitcoin, higher than Ethereum, higher than Solana, not because they got lucky, because they read the calendar and they made a decision. By the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly why this window is closing, what happens if it does, and what the smart money already figured out that most retail hasn't. And stay with me because I'm going to show you what one governor just did in Illinois that is, without question, the single clearest warning sign we have ever seen about what this space looks like when the Clarity Act fails. You need to know about this. Welcome back. I don't do hype here. I don't do price predictions with dates on them. What I do is take the real conversations happening between senators, CEOs, and institutional allocators, the ones that don't always make it to the YouTube homepage, and I break them down so they actually mean something. Today, the Clarity Act, the July deadline, XRP versus Bitcoin when regulation finally lands, the Illinois disaster, and what all of it adds up to right now. Let's get into it. Let me start with something I see people get completely backwards on a daily basis. When the Clarity Act comes up in conversation, people talk about it like it's good for crypto generally, a rising tide, all boats. And yes, technically that framing is not wrong, but it is incomplete. And the part that's missing is actually the most important part. The Clarity Act does almost nothing for Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't need it. Bitcoin is already a store of value. It already has spot ETFs. It's already sitting in pension funds in Canada and Australia and the UK. The regulatory question around Bitcoin was essentially answered years ago. It's commodity-like. It's digital gold. Regulators mostly know what to do with it. The assets that are waiting at a locked gate right now are the ones with actual utility embedded in them. XRP, XLM, HBAR, Chainlink, the smart contract platforms, the tokenization rails, the settlement infrastructure. Everything that touches cross-border finance, real-world asset transfer, decentralized lending, stablecoin settlement, none of that runs through Bitcoin. None of it. When the people who know this space deeply talk about the Clarity Act, they're not talking about Bitcoin getting a price bump. They're talking about a completely different category of asset getting legal recognition for the first time. They're talking about the investment thesis for smart contract platforms, which you cannot capture just by owning Bitcoin, finally being available to institutions in a compliant structure. This matters because when you look at the 7-spot XRP ETFs that are already operating in the United States right now, the market structure for institutional access is not a future thing. It exists. The pipes are already there. What's missing is the legal green light that tells a risk committee or a sovereign wealth fund, this asset class is defined. It's regulated. The rules are clear. You are allowed to buy it. That's it. That's what the Clarity Act does. It doesn't invent the opportunity. The opportunity has been built. The Clarity Act opens the door to it. And when you understand that the assets waiting behind that door are the settlement layers, the payment rails, the tokenization infrastructure, not Bitcoin, then the institutional buying behavior we're seeing right now in XRP starts making a lot more sense. They're not buying XRP because the chart looks good. They're buying it because they already know what's going to be on the other side of that door when it opens. Let me put some numbers around why this matters at scale. Cross-border payments represent roughly $150 trillion in annual volume. The daily Forex settlement market is about $7.5 trillion every single day, and a massive chunk of that is still moving through a correspondent banking system that was designed in the 1970s, the SWIFT model, where banks park capital in what are called nostro and vostro accounts all around the world. Think about what that actually means. Banks are holding money frozen in foreign accounts all over the planet just to pre-fund the possibility that someone might want to move money somewhere later. It's not earning anything. It's not being deployed. It's just sitting there as a buffer for a payment system that can take 2 to 5 days to settle. Ripple's own research puts the value of that frozen capital, just the Nostro Vostro problem globally, at around $27 trillion. That's not a market to capture a slice of. That's a structural problem in global finance that costs real money every single year, and XRP was specifically designed as the solution to that problem. Now, here's where the math actually becomes interesting. If you want to move large sums of value through a bridging asset, the price of that asset has to be high enough to handle the volume without requiring so many tokens that you create your own slippage. That is not speculation. That is infrastructure logic. The same way a highway has to be wide enough to carry traffic efficiently, the settlement asset has to be priced appropriately for the volume it's meant to carry. And then you look at the supply side. Fixed total supply of 100 billion XRP. A significant portion is still in Ripple's escrow, and the vast majority of what gets released each month goes right back into escrow anyway. On-chain data has been showing exchange reserves trending down for months. When institutional demand runs into a shrinking available float, you don't need to speculate on what happens next. You just need to understand what supply and demand mean. This is actually why the data on institutional buying right now is surprising even to people who have been following this closely. When you see institutions choosing XRP over Bitcoin, over Ethereum, over Solana in their current positioning, they're not being contrarian for the sake of it. They did this math. They looked at the utility, the supply mechanics, the regulatory runway, and they came to a specific conclusion. The math pointed them to XRP, so that's where they went. Retail is still debating. Institutions already decided. So who specifically is making this call? Let me walk through the signals that I think matter most right now. Anthony Scaramucci, he talks with a lot of senators. That is not a casual thing to say. This is someone whose business depends on knowing which way regulatory winds are actually blowing, not which way pundits say they're blowing. And he went on the record this week saying he believes there is a greater than 50% probability that the Clarity Act gets done before the end of July. He also said something I want you to sit with for a second. He framed what happens if it doesn't pass. If the Clarity Act fails and if Democrats take the House in the midterms, you are looking at committee chairmanships that have already voted against this legislation. He named Maxine Waters. He named Elizabeth Warren. He said every realistic candidate for the relevant House committee in that scenario voted against clarity. That means if this bill doesn't pass now, the next real window could be years away, not a couple of months, years. Senator Bill Hagerty gave the same timeline independently. This is the man who authored the Genius Act today, the stablecoin bill that just passed and which everyone in this space should understand is now law. He was on Fox News this week and said, after the July 4th recess, this bill becomes a priority focus, and he expects it done before the end of July. Two people with direct Senate access, totally independent conversations, giving you the same specific window. When that happens, you pay attention to it. Then there is Brian Armstrong at Coinbase. He called the Clarity Act a massive TAM expansion moment. Pass for Coinbase, for every exchange, for the entire space. He said the bill has already passed the House. It came out of the Senate Banking Committee with bipartisan support, and he's expecting a Senate floor vote within the next month. That is not a hype statement. That is a CEO telling investors where his company's addressable market is about to get a lot bigger. And then there's Fair Shake. They just spent $12 million to back Barry Moore in Alabama's Senate primary, and he won. $12 million on a single Senate seat. And they announced they still have over $150 million in cash on hand and plan to keep spending. You don't deploy political capital at that scale if you don't believe the legislative strategy is working. Fair Shake is not a charity. They're a machine, and right now the machine is winning. So the timeline is specific. Let me map it out clearly. The Clarity Act has already done something most bills never do. It cleared the Senate Banking Committee with bipartisan support. That committee vote matters because it tells you the bill has enough cross-aisle buy-in to survive. What it still needs is a full Senate floor vote. And for that, you need every Republican plus somewhere between 7 and 10 Democrats, probably 10 realistically, to account for any Republicans who just don't care about this issue, regardless of what their voters think. The procedural vote we saw recently was the Senate testing whether the numbers are actually there before committing to a full floor vote. The fact that it moved forward is meaningful. Here's what's driving the urgency on the clock. Congress goes into August recess. If the bill doesn't clear before then, the legislative calendar gets extremely complicated, extremely fast. Midterm positioning starts, budget battles start. Every month that passes, the political math shifts and the dynamics change. This is not a "we'll get it done eventually" situation. It has a specific window, and that window is July, when someone like Scaramucci, who measures his words because his credibility depends on it, uses the word urgency publicly. That's not a marketing move. When Haggerty confirms the same timeline independently, that is not a coincidence. These signals are pointing at the same month from different directions. The good news, crypto's political position is genuinely stronger right now than it has ever been. The fair shake machine is proof of that. Senators who might be tempted to vote no have to run the math on their own seats. That's real leverage, and it's being used. Now, I want to get into Illinois because I told you at the start of this video that this was the clearest warning sign we have seen, and I meant that. Illinois Governor Pritzker signed a 0.2% tax on digital asset transactions into law this week. Not on profits, on transactions, on transfers, on custody, on wallet services. Every interaction that touches Illinois customers now carries a tax, starting January 1st, 2027. And the way it happened is what really bothers me. They buried it in the state budget, threw it in at the last minute quietly at the end of the legislative session. The Crypto Council for Innovation, an industry group that tracks this stuff closely, called it the most punitive digital asset tax in the country. And that is saying something because states have been experimenting with crypto regulation for years. Nobody else has gone this far. What happens next is not complicated. Builders leave. Exchanges route around it. Compliance teams at every major crypto company are already putting Illinois customers in a separate category. Talented people who work in this space will not choose Chicago over Austin or Miami or Nashville. The governor was trying to find revenue. What he actually did was tell every serious crypto company to go somewhere else. Here's why this matters to you even if you don't live in Illinois. This is what happens in the absence of federal clarity. When there is no national framework, individual states fill the vacuum, and sometimes they fill it with exactly this. The Clarity Act is not just about opportunity. It's also about preventing 50 different Illinois situations from happening in 50 different states. Federal clarity wins over state chaos every single time. I know what some of you are thinking right now. You've been in XRP for a while, maybe longer than you expected to be. Maybe the price is not where you thought it would be by now, and you're wondering whether any of this actually moves the needle or whether it's just another series of soon. I'm not going to tell you this is definitely happening and the price is going to do exactly what you want it to do. That's not analysis. That's just telling you what you want to hear. What I will tell you is this: being early feels identical to being wrong right up until the moment the thesis actually plays out. The frustrating thing about a structural bet, the kind where you're betting on regulatory recognition, on institutional access opening, on utility being adopted at scale D, is that it doesn't move on your timeline. It moves on the timeline of institutions, regulators, and market structure, all of which are slower than you want them to be and faster than most people can respond to once they move. The signal we have right now is not retail excitement. It is not hype on social media. It is Senate access people using the word urgency publicly. It is bipartisan committee votes. It is institutions quietly buying XRP at a higher rate than Bitcoin, while retail argues about charts. That is not the signal of something that is fading. That is the signal of something that is loading. The only question, and I mean this genuinely, is whether you understand the structure well enough to hold through the noise until the catalyst lands. The ones who do are usually the ones who studied it, which is why you're still watching this. Let me leave you with the cleanest version of this thesis I can give you. The Clarity Act is not a catalyst for Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't need it. The Clarity Act is a catalyst for everything built on utility, settlement, tokenization, cross-border infrastructure, decentralized finance. XRP lives in that category. XLM lives in that category. HBAR, Chainlink, the assets that actually touch real financial plumbing. The window is July. Two people with direct Senate access said it independently. A bipartisan committee vote confirmed the numbers are closer than ever. The institutions are already positioned. The political machine behind crypto has more money than it has ever had. Illinois just showed you what happens when this fails at the state level. A governor buries a tax in a budget at midnight and builders leave the next morning. This is not complicated. The infrastructure is built. The demand is there. The door is almost open. The institutions are not hoping XRP wins. They are engineering it too. The only question left is whether you understand that before the window closes or after it already did. Comment clarity below if you made it to the end of this one. If this is the kind of breakdown you come here for, subscribe because the next 60 days are going to matter more than the last 2 years combined.